The words hit me like a slap across the face, echoing through the marble foyer of what used to be my home. You're just the nanny now, Mom. Act like it. My name is Denise Washington. I'm 57 years old, and I never imagined my own son would reduce 32 years of motherhood to hired help. I stood there in the doorway of the house I'd lived in for 25 years, watching my son Trevor dismiss me with the same casual cruelty he'd inherited from his father. The mahogany grandfather clock in the corner chimed 3 o'clock, marking another moment in what had become the longest year of my life. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the handle of my purse, fighting back tears that threatened to spill over onto my carefully applied makeup. Trevor, honey, I was just asking about Emma's school schedule, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. I want to make sure I pick her up on time. My 6-year-old granddaughter peeked around the corner from the living room, her dark eyes wide with confusion. She'd been living with me for the past 8 months, ever since Trevor's messy divorce from his ex-wife Melissa had finally been finalized. The custody arrangement was complicated, but somehow I'd become the primary caregiver while Trevor traveled for his high-paying consulting job, and Melissa dealt with what the lawyers politely called personal issues. Trevor barely glanced at Emma before turning back to me with that cold expression I'd seen too many times lately. At 34, he'd grown into a stranger I hardly recognized. The little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms had been replaced by someone who wore expensive suits and spoke to me like I was an inconvenience. The schedule hasn't changed, he said, checking his phone with obvious impatience. Pick her up at 3:15, help her with homework, make dinner, and have her ready for bed by 8. That's what we're paying you for. Paying me. The word stung worse than I expected. After my husband David died 2 years ago, I'd sold our smaller house and moved in here to help with Emma. I'd given up my part-time job at the community center, left my book club and my volunteer work, and reorganized my entire life around being there for my granddaughter. The modest payment Trevor insisted on giving me barely covered my personal expenses, and certainly didn't compensate for everything I'd sacrificed. I'm not just doing this for money, Trevor, I said quietly. Emma is my granddaughter. I love taking care of her. He looked up from his phone with an expression of mild annoyance, as if I'd interrupted something important. Look, Mom, I appreciate what you do, but let's be clear about the arrangement here. You live in my house, you take care of my daughter, and I pay you for it. It's a job, not a family favor. Emma's small voice piped up from behind me. Grandma, Denise, are you coming to read with me? I turned to see her holding her favorite book, the one about the brave princess who saved her kingdom. Her hair was in the neat braids I'd done that morning, secured with the purple ribbons she loved. She was wearing the dress I'd bought her last week, the one with tiny flowers that made her giggle when she spun around. Of course, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile. Give Grandma just one more minute. Trevor was already heading toward the garage, his leather briefcase in one hand and his car keys in the other. I'll be back Thursday night. There's money on the kitchen counter for groceries and whatever else she needs. Try to keep the receipts this time. The garage door rumbled open and closed, and then he was gone, leaving me standing in the foyer with my granddaughter, and the weight of his words pressing down on my shoulders. Emma slipped her small hand into mine, and I squeezed it gently. Grandma, why does Daddy talk to you like that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I knelt down to her level, looking into those innocent eyes that reminded me so much of Trevor when he was her age. Sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're stressed, baby girl. Your daddy works very hard, and he's got a lot on his mind. But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Trevor's behavior had been escalating for months, each interaction more dismissive than the last. He'd started treating me like hired help shortly after I moved in, but it had gotten worse recently, much worse. Emma nodded solemnly, but I could see the confusion in her expression. She was too young to understand the complicated dynamics between adults, but old enough to sense when something wasn't right. I'd been trying to shield her from the tension, but it was getting harder to hide. "Come on," I said, standing up and taking her hand. "Let's go read that story." We settled into the big armchair in the living room, Emma curled up against my side as I opened the book. She smelled like the lavender shampoo I used when I gave her baths, and her small body was warm and trusting against mine. These quiet moments were what I treasured most, when it was just the two of us and the outside world faded away. As I read about the princess's adventures, my mind wandered to how different things had been when Trevor was small. He'd been such a sweet child, always eager to help in the kitchen or to show me the pictures he'd drawn at school. David and I had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities we'd never had. We'd worked extra hours to pay for his private school education, saved every penny we could for his college tuition, and supported him through graduate school. When he'd gotten his first job at the consulting firm, we'd been so proud. He'd called us almost every week, excited to share his successes and ask for advice. But success had changed him, or maybe it had revealed something that was always there. The more money he made, the more distant he became. The bigger his house got, the smaller his heart seemed to grow. After David's funeral, Trevor had been supportive at first. He'd helped me sort through the legal paperwork and had even suggested I might want to move closer to him and Emma. When Melissa had filed for divorce 6 months later, citing Trevor's work obsession and emotional unavailability, he'd asked me to help with Emma during the transition. "Just temporarily," he'd said, "until I can figure out a better arrangement." That was 14 months ago. Emma had fallen asleep against my shoulder, the book sliding down toward the floor. I carefully adjusted her position and reached for my phone to check the time. 2 hours until I needed to start dinner preparations. Trevor expected meals that were worthy of the restaurants he frequented for business, and he wasn't shy about his criticism when something didn't meet his standards. I thought about the conversation I'd had with my sister Patricia the night before. She'd called from her home in Atlanta, full of stories about her retirement adventures and her volunteer work with literacy programs. At 62, she was living the life I'd planned for myself before everything changed. "Denise, honey, you know I love you, but this situation with Trevor isn't right," she'd said. "He's taking advantage of your good heart and you're letting him." I defended him, the way I always did. "He's going through a difficult time, Pat. The divorce was hard on him, and his job is so demanding. He needs my help." "He needs to grow up and take responsibility for his own child," Patricia had replied bluntly. "And he needs to stop treating his mother like she's disposable." The words had stung, because they carried the ring of truth. But Trevor was my son, my only child, and Emma needed stability. What kind of grandmother would I be if I abandoned them when they needed me most? My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my friend Eleanor, asking if I wanted to join her for coffee tomorrow morning. Eleanor and I had been close friends for over 15 years, meeting at a parenting class when Trevor was in high school. She'd recently retired from her job as a school principal and was always trying to get me to join her for various activities. I started to type a response explaining that I couldn't leave Emma, then stopped. Trevor would be gone until Thursday, and Emma had school tomorrow. There was no reason I couldn't meet Eleanor for an hour or two. "Yes," I typed back. "I'd love to." It felt like a small act of rebellion. Emma stirred in my arms, blinking sleepily as she looked around the room. "Is it time for snacks?" she asked, her voice still drowsy. "What would you like, sweetheart?" I asked, smoothing her hair back from her face. "Can we make cookies? The ones with the chocolate chips?" I glanced toward the kitchen, thinking about the dinner I needed to prepare and the laundry that was waiting to be folded. Trevor's schedule was precise, and deviations were not appreciated. But looking down at Emma's hopeful face, I made another small decision. Absolutely, I said. Let's make the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. Her face lit up with genuine joy, the kind of pure happiness that reminded me why I'd made the sacrifices I had. We spent the next hour in the kitchen, Emma standing on her step stool beside me as we measured ingredients and mixed the dough. She chattered about her day at school, telling me about her art project and the new song she'd learned in music class. Mrs. Henderson says I have a beautiful singing voice, she said proudly, flour dusting her nose where she'd rubbed it with her messy hands. Mrs. Henderson is absolutely right, I said, dropping spoonfuls of dough onto the baking sheet. You get that from your grandpa David. He used to sing to me when we were dating. Emma's eyes widened with interest. Tell me about Grandpa David again. I'd told her stories about her grandfather dozens of times, but she never seemed to tire of hearing them. As the cookies baked, filling the kitchen with their warm, sweet smell, I told her about how David had proposed to me at a church picnic, how he'd worked 2 jobs to help pay for Trevor's education, and how he'd always made me laugh even on the hardest days. He would have loved you so much, Emma, I said, wiping a smudge of chocolate from her cheek. He always wanted to be a grandfather. I wish I could have met him, she said seriously. Me too, baby girl. Me too. We were pulling the cookies from the oven when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my lawyer's office, which surprised me. I'd used Margaret Foster to handle David's estate and a few other legal matters, but I hadn't spoken to her in months. Mrs. Washington? Margaret's voice was professional but warm. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I have some information regarding your late husband's life insurance policy that I think you should know about. I stepped into the hallway, lowering my voice. What kind of information? It's rather complex and I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Would you be able to come in this week? It concerns a policy that David had through his employer that we hadn't previously accounted for. My heart began to race. David had been meticulous about his insurance, but there had been so many policies and documents to sort through after his death. The thought that there might be something we'd missed was both exciting and terrifying. Can you give me any idea what we're talking about? I asked. Let's just say it could significantly change your financial situation, Margaret said carefully. When would be convenient for you? I thought about my schedule, which was entirely built around Emma's needs and Trevor's expectations. Could I come Thursday morning? Around 10? Perfect. I'll see you then. I hung up the phone, my mind spinning with possibilities. What if there was money we hadn't known about? What if David's careful planning had provided more security than we'd realized? The thought made me feel guilty somehow, as if hoping for financial independence was a betrayal of my commitment to Emma. Grandma, the cookies are ready, Emma called from the kitchen. I returned to find her carefully arranging the warm cookies on a plate, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. She'd managed to keep most of them intact, though a few had crumbled from her enthusiastic handling. They look perfect, I said, giving her a hug. Should we save some for your daddy? Emma nodded eagerly. He loves cookies. Maybe they'll make him happy. The innocent hope in her voice made my chest tighten. She was always trying to please Trevor, always looking for ways to earn his attention and approval. I saw too much of myself in her efforts, and it worried me. We spent the rest of the afternoon working on homework and playing games. Emma was bright and curious, asking questions about everything from why birds could fly to how telephones worked. I loved these conversations, the way her mind worked through problems and made connections. She reminded me of Trevor at that age, before life had made him hard and distant. When Trevor came home that evening, he barely acknowledged the plate of cookies Emma had carefully prepared for him. He was on his phone, pacing through the kitchen while he talked to someone about quarterly projections and client presentations. Emma sat at the dining table, watching him hopefully, but he never even glanced in her direction. Daddy, try a cookie, she said during a brief pause in his conversation. He held up one finger in a wait gesture and continued his call. Emma's face fell, and she looked down at her coloring book with disappointment written in every line of her small body. I felt anger rise in my throat like bile. This was his daughter, his beautiful, loving daughter, who just wanted 5 minutes of his attention. But I swallowed the words I wanted to say and instead moved to sit beside Emma. The cookies are delicious, I whispered to her. Daddy's just busy with work. He'll try them later. But I knew he wouldn't. Just like he wouldn't ask about her day or notice the picture she'd drawn for him that was sitting by his keys. Just like he wouldn't read her a bedtime story or tuck her in with a special song she loved. Those jobs all fell to me, the nanny. After Emma was asleep, I sat in my room thinking about Margaret's phone call. David had always been secretive about money, not because he was hiding anything, but because he'd grown up poor and never wanted me to worry about financial security. He'd handled all our investments and insurance policies, updating me only when necessary. What if there was enough money to change everything? What if I could afford my own place again, somewhere Emma could visit without the constant tension that filled this house? What if I could stop walking on eggshells around my own son? The thought scared me as much as it excited me. I'd been dependent on others for so long that the idea of true independence felt overwhelming. But it also felt like a possibility I hadn't dared to consider in months. I pulled out my laptop and began researching apartments in good school districts. Not because I was definitely leaving, I told myself, but just to see what was available, just to know what my options might be. As I scrolled through listings, I thought about Patricia's words from the night before. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been letting Trevor take advantage of my love for him and Emma. Maybe it was time to stop accepting treatment that I would never tolerate from anyone else. The next morning, Emma and I went through our usual routine. I braided her hair, made her breakfast, and walked her to the bus stop at the end of the driveway. She chattered about the show-and-tell presentation she was giving that day, clutching the flower she'd picked from the garden to share with her class. "Will you help me practice my presentation tonight?" she asked, as the bus pulled up. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll make sure you're ready." I watched the bus disappear around the corner, then drove to meet Eleanor at our favorite coffee shop downtown. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at our usual table by the window with her silver hair perfectly styled and her warm smile lighting up her face. "Denise, you look wonderful," she said, standing to hug me. "I've missed seeing you." We settled into our chairs with our coffee, and Eleanor immediately launched into stories about her recent travels and volunteer work. She was glowing with the satisfaction of someone who was living life on her own terms, making her own choices about how to spend her time and energy. "I've been thinking about you so much lately," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "How are things really going with Trevor and Emma?" The concern in her voice nearly undid me. I'd been holding everything together for so long that having someone ask about my well-being felt almost foreign. "It's complicated," I said carefully. "Honey, complicated is when you can't decide what to have for dinner. What you're dealing with sounds more serious than that." Eleanor had always been direct, a quality that had served her well as a school principal. She could see through pretense and evasion with the skill of someone who'd spent decades working with teenagers. I found myself telling her about Trevor's increasing coldness, about feeling like a stranger in what had once been my home, about the way he dismissed my contributions and treated me like hired help. The words poured out of me like water from a broken dam, months of hurt and frustration finally finding voice. "Oh, Denise," Eleanor said when I finished. "Sweetheart, this isn't right. None of this is right." "But Emma needs stability," I said, the familiar defense rising automatically. "And Trevor is under so much pressure with work and the divorce." "Emma needs love and attention from her father, not a grandmother who's being treated like a servant. Eleanor replied firmly. And Trevor needs to learn that being under pressure doesn't give him the right to abuse the people who love him. The word abuse made me flinch. I'd never thought of Trevor's behavior in those terms, but hearing it said aloud, I couldn't deny the accuracy. Emotional abuse was still abuse, even when it came from your own child. I don't know what to do, I admitted. I love Emma so much, and I'm afraid if I stand up to Trevor, he'll cut me out of her life completely. Eleanor leaned forward, her expression serious but kind. Honey, he's already cutting you out of your own life. The question is how much more of yourself you're willing to lose. Her words stayed with me as I drove home, echoing through my mind alongside the memory of Trevor's casual cruelty. You're just the nanny now, Mom. Act like it. Maybe it was time to stop acting like the nanny and start acting like the woman who had raised him, loved him, and deserved better than the treatment I'd been accepting. Maybe it was time to remember that I was Denise Washington, not just someone's employee or caretaker, but a person with my own worth and dignity. Maybe it was time to find out what Margaret had discovered about David's insurance policy and what that might mean for my future. The house felt different when I walked through the front door, as if Eleanor's words had shifted something fundamental in my perspective. The marble foyer that had impressed me when Trevor first bought the house now seemed cold and impersonal. The expensive furniture and artwork felt like props in someone else's life, beautiful but meaningless. I had 3 hours before Emma came home from school. 3 hours to think about what I wanted my life to look like and what I was willing to do to make that happen. For the first time in months, those 3 hours felt like time that belonged to me. Thursday morning arrived with an unusual sense of anticipation. I'd spent the previous evening helping Emma with her show and tell presentation, listening to her practice, describing the life cycle of the flowers she'd picked. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for a brief time, I'd forgotten about the weight pressing on my shoulders. Trevor had left for another business trip early that morning, barely pausing to say goodbye to Emma. She'd run to the window to wave at his car, but he was already on his phone, his attention elsewhere. I'd watched her small shoulders slump with disappointment, and something hard and cold had settled in my chest. After dropping Emma at school, I drove to Margaret Foster's law office in downtown. The building was older but well-maintained, with the kind of solid dignity that spoke of established practice and careful attention to detail. Margaret's secretary, a kind woman named Joyce, offered me coffee while I waited. Mrs. Foster will be right with you, Joyce said, settling me into a comfortable chair in the reception area. She's been looking forward to this meeting. Margaret appeared a few minutes later, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, and her expression serious but warm. She was a woman in her early 60s who had built her practice on helping families navigate difficult transitions. David and I had trusted her completely, and I was grateful for her steady presence during the chaos after his death. Denise, thank you for coming, she said, leading me into her office. Please, have a seat. I have some rather extraordinary news to share with you. Her office was lined with law books and family photos, creating an atmosphere that was both professional and welcoming. She gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, then pulled out a thick file folder. As you know, we've been very thorough in settling David's estate, she began, opening the folder. However, I recently received a call from his former employer's insurance company. It seems there was a policy we weren't aware of, one that David had purchased separately through their benefits program about 10 years ago. My heart began to race. What kind of policy? Margaret pulled out several documents, her expression growing more serious. It's a substantial life insurance policy, Denise. $500,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as I tried to process what she just said. $500,000. More money than David and I had ever seen at one time in our entire marriage. That's impossible, I whispered. David would have told me about something that significant. Actually, he tried to, Margaret said gently, pulling out another document. This is a letter he wrote to you to be delivered along with the policy information. The insurance company had an old address on file, which is why it's taken so long to reach us. She handed me an envelope with my name written in David's familiar handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, unfolding the letter that had been waiting for me for 2 years. My dearest Denise, it began, and I could almost hear his voice speaking the words. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and I'm so sorry I'm not there to help you through whatever comes next. I know how much you worry about money, so I want you to know that I've made sure you'll be taken care of. I had to pause, tears blurring my vision. Margaret quietly handed me a box of tissues. I bought this policy when I started having chest pains a few years ago, the letter continued. The doctor said it was just stress, but it reminded me that nothing is guaranteed. I didn't tell you about it because I didn't want you to worry about my health, and because I wanted it to be a surprise if anything ever happened to me. A surprise. Even in death, David had been trying to take care of me, trying to make sure I would be secure and independent. The money is yours to do with whatever you think is best, he'd written. But if you're reading this, then you know what I hope for you. I hope you'll use it to build the life you want, not the life you think you should have. I hope you'll remember that you deserve happiness and respect, and that you should never settle for less than that from anyone, including our son. The last line made me gasp. Even then, David had seen something in Trevor that worried him. I love you, Denise. Live well. I sat in Margaret's office, holding the letter and trying to comprehend how dramatically my circumstances had just changed. $500,000. Enough to buy my own home, to live independently, to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what others expected of me. There are some tax implications we'll need to discuss, Margaret was saying, but her voice seemed to be coming from far away. And I'd recommend meeting with a financial advisor to discuss investment options. But Denise, this changes everything for you, doesn't it? I looked up at her, this woman who had guided me through the darkest period of my life, and nodded slowly. Yes, I said. I think it does. The process of claiming the insurance money would take a few weeks, Margaret explained, but there was no question about my entitlement to it. David had kept up with all the premiums, and everything was in perfect order. She gave me copies of all the documents and recommended a financial advisor who specialized in helping women plan for independent retirement. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to consider in months. I could buy a house in Emma's school district, something with a yard where she could play and a guest room where she could stay whenever she wanted. I could travel, maybe visit Patricia in Atlanta or take that trip to Ireland that David and I had always talked about. I could volunteer again, maybe go back to school, rediscover the parts of myself that had gotten lost in the role of caretaker and convenience. But first, I had to figure out how to handle Trevor. Emma bounded off the school bus that afternoon, chattering excitedly about her successful presentation. Mrs. Henderson said my flower was beautiful, and Tommy asked if he could see it up close. She said, practically glowing with pride. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, I said, giving her a hug. You worked very hard on that presentation. We spent the afternoon working on her homework and playing in the backyard. I watched her run around the garden, chasing butterflies and collecting interesting rocks, and I felt a fierce protectiveness rise in my chest. Whatever changes came next, I would make sure Emma remained a priority. She deserved better than a father who treated her like an afterthought and a home environment filled with tension. Trevor returned from his trip that evening, bringing with him the familiar atmosphere of impatience and distraction. He dumped his suitcase in the hallway and immediately headed for his home office, barely acknowledging Emma's excited attempts to tell him about her day. Daddy, I got a gold star on my presentation, she called after him. That's nice, Em, he said without turning around. I need to catch up on some emails. I watched Emma's face fall and something inside me snapped. I followed Trevor into his office, closing the door behind me. We need to talk, I said. He didn't look up from his computer. Can it wait? I've got a conference call in 20 minutes. No, it can't wait, and you're going to want to hear this. Something in my tone must have gotten his attention because he finally looked at me, his expression annoyed but alert. What's this about, Mom? It's about the way you've been treating me, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. And it's about the way you've been treating your daughter. Trevor's face darkened. I don't have time for this right now. Whatever's bothering you, we can discuss it later. No, Trevor, we're discussing it now. I moved to stand directly in front of his desk, forcing him to meet my eyes. For the first time in months, I wasn't backing down, wasn't swallowing my words to keep the peace. You called me a nanny, I continued. You told me to act like hired help. Well, I've got news for you, son. Hired help gets treated with basic respect and courtesy. Hired help gets time off and benefits and the right to quit when their employer treats them badly. Trevor's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, I pressed on. I am your mother, Trevor. I gave birth to you, raised you, sacrificed for you, and loved you unconditionally for 34 years. I moved into this house to help you during a difficult time, and instead of gratitude, I've received nothing but dismissal and contempt. Mom, you're being dramatic. I'm being honest, I interrupted. And I'm not finished. That little girl out there adores you. She waits every day for you to notice her, to spend time with her, to show her that she matters to you. Instead, you treat her like she's an inconvenience, like she's something to be managed rather than loved. Trevor stood up, his face flushed with anger. Don't tell me how to parent my own daughter. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the responsibilities I have. I understand that your father worked 2 jobs to put you through school, and he still found time to read you bedtime stories and attend your soccer games. I shot back. I understand that being busy isn't an excuse for being cruel. Cruel? Trevor's voice rose. I'm providing for her. I'm giving her everything she needs. Everything except a father who actually cares about her emotional well-being, I said. And you know what, Trevor? She deserves better than that, and so do I. The office fell silent, except for the sound of our angry breathing. Trevor stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, as if my willingness to confront him had transformed me into someone he didn't recognize. If you're not happy with the arrangement, you're free to leave, he said finally, his voice cold and controlled. Actually, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out the folder Margaret had given me. That's exactly what I plan to do. I placed the insurance documents on his desk, watching his expression change from anger to confusion to something that might have been fear. What is this? He asked, picking up the papers. It's your father's life insurance policy, the one we didn't know about, the one that's going to give me the independence to make my own choices about how I want to live. Trevor's face went pale as he scanned the documents, his eyes stopping on the amount. $500,000? That's right, which means I no longer need to depend on your generosity or tolerate your disrespect. I can afford my own place, my own life, my own decisions. He looked up at me, and for the first time in months, I saw genuine concern in his expression. Mom, you can't be serious. What about Emma? What about her? You just told me I'm free to leave. You've made it clear that my role here is purely transactional. Well, consider this my resignation. Trevor set the papers down, his hands shaking slightly. You can't just abandon her. She needs you. She needs a father who loves her and pays attention to her. I said, she needs a home where people treat each other with kindness and respect. What she doesn't need is to grow up watching you treat the people who love you like they're disposable. I could see the wheels turning in Trevor's mind, the reality of his situation beginning to sink in. Without me, he would need to find alternative childcare, rearrange his travel schedule, actually take responsibility for the daily care of his daughter. The convenience he'd taken for granted was about to disappear. Look, if this is about money, we can discuss increasing your payment, he said, his tone becoming more conciliatory. This isn't about money, Trevor. This is about respect. This is about treating your family like they matter. I moved toward the door, then turned back to face him. I'll give you 2 weeks to make other arrangements for Emma's care. After that, I'll be moving out. Mom, wait. But I was already walking away, my heart pounding with adrenaline and something that felt like freedom. Emma was in the living room, coloring in her book and humming quietly to herself. I sat down beside her, wrapping my arm around her small shoulders. Sweetheart, Grandma needs to talk to you about something important, I said gently. She looked up at me with those trusting dark eyes, and I felt my resolve waver for a moment. This conversation was going to be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. What is it, Grandma? Well, you know how Grandma has been living here to help take care of you while your daddy works. Emma nodded, setting down her crayon. Grandma is going to get her own house soon, somewhere close by where you can come visit and play whenever you want. Emma's face crumpled with confusion and worry. But why? Don't you want to live with me anymore? My heart broke a little at the hurt in her voice. Oh, sweetheart, I love living with you. But sometimes grown-ups need their own space, their own homes. It doesn't mean I love you any less, and it doesn't mean we won't see each other all the time. Will I still be able to stay with you sometimes? Absolutely. In fact, you'll have your very own room at Grandma's house, and we can decorate it however you want. Emma brightened a little at this prospect. Can I have purple walls? If that's what you want, then purple walls it is. Over the next hour, I tried to explain the changes that were coming in terms that a 6-year-old could understand. I assured her that the most important things wouldn't change, that I would still love her, still be her grandmother, still be there whenever she needed me. But I also tried to prepare her for the reality that her daily routine was going to be different. Will Daddy take care of me? She asked, and the uncertainty in her voice made me angry all over again. Your daddy loves you very much, I said, choosing my words carefully, and he's going to learn how to take better care of you. That night, after Emma was asleep, Trevor knocked on my bedroom door. I opened it to find him standing in the hallway, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like vulnerability. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside to let him in, and he sat heavily in the chair by my window. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I've been thinking about what you said, he began finally. About Dad, about the way he balanced everything. And? Trevor ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. I don't know how he did it. The work, the family, all of it. I feel like I'm drowning most of the time. It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in months, and I felt some of my anger soften. Your father struggled too, Trevor. There were plenty of times when he felt overwhelmed. But he never let that become an excuse to treat us badly. I know I haven't been. Trevor paused, searching for words. I know I've been difficult lately. The divorce, the job pressure, trying to figure out how to be a single parent, it's all been a lot. Being under pressure doesn't give you the right to take it out on the people who love you. I said quietly, especially not Emma. She's just a little girl, Trevor. She needs to know that her father thinks she's the most important thing in his world. Trevor's eyes filled with tears, and I realized I hadn't seen him cry since his father's funeral. I do think she's important. I love her so much it scares me sometimes. but I don't know how to be the kind of father she deserves. You start by showing up, I said simply. You put down the phone when she's talking to you. You ask about her day and actually listen to the answer. You read her bedtime stories and help her with her homework and make her feel like she matters more than any business deal or conference call. And what about you? He asked. Are you really going to leave? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and worried about for 34 years, and I felt the weight of a decision that would change everything. That depends on you, I said, finally. I'm not going to continue living in a situation where I'm treated with disrespect. I'm not going to enable you to avoid being a real parent to Emma. But if you're willing to make real changes, if you're willing to treat us both with the love and consideration we deserve, then maybe we can figure out a different arrangement. Trevor was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the dark yard. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it, for treating you badly, for taking you for granted, for being the kind of man Dad wouldn't be proud of. The apology felt genuine, but I'd heard apologies before. Words are easy, Trevor, actions are what matter. He nodded, wiping his eyes. Tell me what you need from me. Tell me how to make this right. And so we talked, really talked, for the first time in months. I told him about my need for respect and autonomy, about wanting to be treated as a valued family member rather than hired help. I told him about Emma's emotional needs, about the importance of consistency and attention and unconditional love. I told him about my own dreams and plans, about the life I wanted to build with the financial security David had provided. Trevor listened without interrupting, without making excuses, without checking his phone. And slowly, carefully, we began to construct the framework for a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than dependence and resentment. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. Trevor would have to prove his commitment to change through consistent actions over time. Emma would need support and reassurance as she adjusted to new routines, and I would have to learn how to maintain my boundaries while still being the loving grandmother Emma needed. But for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. I felt like myself again. Not just a caretaker or a convenience, but Denise Washington, a woman with her own worth and dignity and choices. The next morning, Emma and I made pancakes together while Trevor sat at the kitchen table, actually engaging in conversation instead of staring at his phone. He asked Emma about her upcoming school projects, listened to her excited chatter about her friends, and even volunteered to help with her math homework that evening. It was a small start, but it was a start. Later that day, while Emma was playing in the backyard, Trevor found me in the kitchen. I called my boss this morning, he said. I'm cutting back on travel, at least for the next few months. Emma needs me here, and honestly, I need to remember what's really important. I felt a surge of hope mixed with caution. That's a good first step. I also want to apologize to you properly in front of Emma. I want her to see that what I said to you was wrong and that family members should treat each other with respect. The gesture meant more to me than he probably realized. Children learn what they live, and Emma needed to see that mistakes could be acknowledged and relationships could be repaired. That evening, after dinner, Trevor asked Emma to join us in the living room. He knelt down to her level, his expression serious but gentle. Emma, I need to apologize to Grandma Denise, and I want you to hear it, he said. Emma looked between us with curious eyes, sensing the importance of the moment. Grandma has been taking wonderful care of you, and instead of thanking her, I was rude and unkind. That was wrong of me, and I'm sorry. He turned to me, his voice steady and sincere. Mom, I'm sorry for treating you disrespectfully. I'm sorry for taking your love and sacrifice for granted. You deserve so much better, and I promise to do better. Emma looked at me with wide eyes. Are you going to forgive Daddy, Grandma? I smiled at her, then at Trevor. Yes, sweetheart. When people make real efforts to change, forgiveness is possible. Over the following weeks, Trevor proved that his commitment to change was genuine. He rearranged his schedule to be present for Emma's bedtime routine. He started joining us for dinner instead of eating while working. He planned weekend activities that focused on Emma rather than his own convenience. The transformation wasn't perfect or complete, but it was real. And more importantly, Emma blossomed under her father's increased attention. She started talking more openly about her feelings, laughing more freely, and developing the confidence that comes from knowing you are truly seen and valued. As for me, I used my newfound financial independence to create the life I'd always wanted. I bought a charming house just 10 minutes away from Trevor's, with a big yard and a purple bedroom for Emma. I enrolled in art classes, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. I planned a trip to Ireland, carrying David's memory with me as I explored the country we dreamed of visiting together. But perhaps most importantly, I rediscovered my own worth. I learned that love doesn't require self-sacrifice to the point of self-destruction. I learned that demanding respect doesn't make you selfish, and that setting boundaries doesn't make you unloving. Trevor and I still had difficult moments, times when old patterns threatened to resurface, but we'd established a new foundation built on honest communication and mutual respect. When problems arose, we addressed them directly instead of letting resentment build. Emma thrived in this new dynamic. She split her time between both homes, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and wanted in both places. She had a father who was learning to prioritize her emotional needs and a grandmother who could offer love without resentment or exhaustion. 6 months after that confrontation in Trevor's office, we were all gathered in my new kitchen, making cookies for Emma's school bake sale. Trevor was actually helping measuring ingredients while Emma stirred the batter. The easy conversation and genuine laughter would have seemed impossible during those dark months when I'd felt invisible in my own life. "Grandma," Emma said, looking up from the mixing bowl, "I'm glad you got your own house. It's like having two homes where I'm loved." Trevor met my eyes across the kitchen, and I saw gratitude there, along with something that looked like respect. He learned that treating family members well wasn't just morally right, it was practically smart. Happy, respected people give their best effort. People who feel valued want to help. People who are loved freely offer love in return. As for me, I learned that it's never too late to demand better for yourself. At 57, I discovered that my life was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. I had financial security, family relationships based on respect rather than dependency, and the freedom to pursue my own interests and dreams. David's final gift hadn't just been money, it had been the reminder that I deserved happiness and dignity, and that I should never settle for less than that from anyone, including our son. I thought of his letter often, especially the part where he'd hoped I would build the life I wanted, not the life I thought I should have. With gratitude and determination, that's exactly what I was doing. And Emma, beautiful Emma, was learning by example that love and respect go hand in hand, that family members should treat each other with kindness, and that it's possible to stand up for yourself while still maintaining loving relationships. As I watched her giggle with her father over the cookie dough, I knew that the lessons she was learning now would serve her well throughout her life. She would grow up expecting to be treated with dignity, knowing her own worth, and understanding that love requires both giving and receiving respect. Sometimes the best gift you can give your family is refusing to accept treatment that diminishes you. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is demand better, both for yourself and for those you care about. Trevor had called me just the nanny, but I'd proven that I was so much more than that. I was Denise Washington, mother, grandmother, and woman of worth. And I would never let anyone, not even my own son, make me forget that again.